Hi, I'm Anynewprovince, and is this possibly Pauper Playable? That's the question I want to answer about Duska Legion Zealot, one of the cards that was printed in Rivals of Ixalan. Before I get into the deck tech, I just want to remind you that you can like the video or subscribe to the channel down below. I'd seriously appreciate it. It's a great way to let me know that you're enjoying everything, and it really encourages me to keep making great Pauper content. Today I'm going to tell you about a few of the decks that the community thinks Duska Legion Zealot slots into. I'll let you know why I didn't decide to play those traditional decks, and then I'll break down the deck that I decided on for this week called Esper Routes. Duska Legion Zealot is a 2-mana 2/2 that says, when Duska Legion Zealot enters the battlefield, you draw a card and you lose 1 life. People are hearkening this to cards like Missionary, which is also a 2-mana 2/2. When it enters the battlefield, you draw a card, but you don't lose the life. They're also calling it a tiny Phyrexian Rager, because Phyrexian Rager is a 3-mana 2/2 that draws you a card and loses you a life when it enters the battlefield. The first home the community thought of for Duska Legion Zealot was Mono Black Control. Mono Black Control only has 1 creature-based 2-drop in Kuambaj Witches. People thought that maybe Duska Legion Zealot could do a better impression of Phyrexian Rager by coming down a turn earlier. While Mono Black Control is certainly not the worst home for Duska Legion Zealot, I'm not sure that the deck wants it. I don't think that they want another 2-drop besides Kuambaj Witches. You always want to be playing that card on turn 2 to add devotion for your Grey Merchant of Asphodel and to ping down your opponent's fairies or elves. I also think that it being a 1/1 makes it a lot worse than Phyrexian Rager. Mono Black Control doesn't actually have that many threats, so if you clear the board, you want to get your clock going so that when your Grey Merchant comes down, you straight up kill your opponent with the Drain Life. Another popular suggestion for Duska Legion Zealot was to play it alongside ninjas. Using the ninjutsu ability of Ninja of the Deep Hours or Okiba Gang Shinobi, you can pick up your unblocked Duska Legion Zealot and then play it again to lose another life and draw another card. I think this might be the best way to use Duska Legion Zealot, getting multiple triggers off of its ability. That's why I ended up putting it in a recursive deck. However, I couldn't use ninjas because, like we heard last week, ninjutsu is bugged and you can't use it at the optimal time. That's why I'm going out on a limb and using one of my favorite engine cards to try to recur Duska Legion Zealot. That engine card is called Escape Routes. Escape Routes says, 2 and a blue, return target white or black creature you control to its owner's hand. This is an enchantment that just sits there and lets you bounce your white and black creatures, then replay them for more value. Escape Routes combos with a lot of creatures in the format. That's why this deck build looks a little bit eclectic. Duska Legion Zealot really pushed me over the edge to try to use this card. It seems very powerful to have a cantripping creature that you can recur every turn, so I jammed all of the most powerful creatures that combo with Escape Routes into a deck and started testing it. I'll start by explaining the cards that are specifically in this deck because of the ability to bounce them with Escape Routes. First, we have Stonehorn Dignitary. Stonehorn Dignitary says, when Stonehorn Dignitary enters the battlefield, target opponent skips his or her next combat phase. If we have to cast this spell without being able to bounce it with Escape Routes, it isn't exactly a blowout. It can fog our opponent for a turn and maybe give us just enough time to draw into our Escape Routes. Also, if you just have 7 mana, you can play out your Stonehorn Dignitary with your Escape Routes already on the battlefield, protect it from any kind of removal spell using Escape Routes, and then play it again on the next turn so that your opponent has to skip their combat phase for the rest of the game. Our next card is Mesmeric Fiend. It says, when Mesmeric Fiend enters the battlefield, target opponent reveals his or her hand and you choose a non-land card from it. Exile that card. When Mesmeric Fiend leaves the battlefield, return the exiled card to its owner's hand. If we can bounce Mesmeric Fiend while its first trigger is on the stack, then we can exile a card from our opponent's hand permanently. Its other trigger goes onto the stack after you bounce it with Escape Routes and then resolves before the card is removed from their hand. That means when you exile it with the original trigger, which went on the stack first, then it's gone forever. There are a couple more cards that combo with Escape Routes, but their impact isn't always as great as with the Stonehorn Dignitary or with the Mesmeric Fiend. First, we have Lone Missionary that says, when Lone Missionary enters the battlefield, you gain 4 life. That means we have a 5-mana gain 4 life that fogs one of your opponent's creatures. We also have 2 Aven Riftwatchers, which do a similar thing, but they can trade with Delvers, and they also gain 4 life when they enter and leave the battlefield. Aven Riftwatchers says, flying, vanishing 3. This creature enters the battlefield with 3 time counters on it. At the beginning of your upkeep, remove a time counter from it. When the last is removed, sacrifice it. When Aven Riftwatchers enters the battlefield or leaves the battlefield, you gain 2 life. We're also running Duska Legion Zealot's big brother, Phyrexian Rager. Phyrexian Rager is a 3-mana 2/2 that says, when Phyrexian Rager enters the battlefield, you draw a card and you lose 1 life. Our last two creatures are Thraben Inspector, which says, when Thraben Inspector enters the battlefield, investigate. We also have Custody Squire, and Custody Squire says, Will of the Council, when Custody Squire enters the battlefield, starting with you, each player votes for an artifact, creature, or enchantment card in your graveyard. Return each card with the most votes or tied for the most votes to your hand. These cards also combo with Escape Routes, but they're a little bit harder to get value out of with the enchantment. They're just in this deck because they're great white cards, and we proved that in our Custody Metalcraft videos. I'll link you in one of those cards up there. We went 5-0 in a league. It was sweet. It's going to take a little while to develop our mana, find escape routes, and find a combo to lock our opponent out of the game with. That's why we're running some of the strongest interaction in black and white. We start with Doomblade. Doomblade just says, destroy target non-black creature. It's pretty straightforward. We have Chainer's Edict, which says, target player sacrifices a creature, and you can flash it back out of your graveyard by paying 7 mana. And we also have Journey to Nowhere. Journey to Nowhere says, when Journey to Nowhere enters the battlefield, exile target creature. When Journey to Nowhere leaves the battlefield, return the exiled creature to the battlefield under of its owner's control. Sometimes locking your opponent out of the game with Stonehorn Dignitary just isn't enough, even if we can recur every single card in our deck out of our graveyard with Custody Squire. That's why I've included Evenkar's Justice. Evenkar's Justice says, buy back 3, you may pay an additional 3 mana as you cast this spell. If you do, put this card into your hand as it resolves. Evenkar's Justice deals 2 damage to each creature and each player. A lot of our creatures will survive the first Evenkar's Justice. Hopefully we can sweep enough of our opponent's board to start pecking in with our creatures and win the game. Also, it can just be used as a win condition. We've seen most of our deck by the end of each game, so if we can just keep buying back Evenkar's Justice using lone missionaries or Aven Riftwatchers as a life buffer, then we can just kill our opponent with that. Alright, let's talk about this mana base. This was actually a pretty big point of contention with me as I was first building this deck. At first I had Dimir and Orzhov Signets in the deck to ramp and to fix our blue mana. That allowed me to play a few more untapped lands of each source. I found out that this strategy was a little bit worse because drawing into Signets later on in the game when we're fogging our opponent out might just spell our demise. Their top decks could just be better. So this is how the mana base turned out. We have 4 Ash Barrens that say tap, add colorless to your mana pool, and basic land cycling for 1 generic mana. That means you can pay 1 mana, discard this from your hand, and search your library for any basic land card. We have 2 Dismal Backwaters. They come into the battlefield tapped and gain you a life. They add blue and black, just standard Pauper duels. Other standard Pauper duels include Scoured Barrens. It's the standard black-white Pauper duel, and we have Tranquil Cove, the blue-white Pauper duel. We also run 1 Orzhov Basilica because we're cheating on lands just a little bit. We want to hit all of our land drops so that we have as much mana as possible to go off with escape routes. We're also running 6 swamps, 4 plains, and 2 islands. Like I said, I wanted to try to get as many untapped lands into this deck as possible. It also gives us lots of targets for Ash Barrens in the late game. Alright, let's have a look at this sideboard. First, we have Standard Bearer that says, while choosing targets as part of casting a spell or activating an ability, your opponents must choose at least 1 flag bearer on the battlefield if able. This card is really great against hyper-aggressive decks we'd normally have trouble with. Those are decks like Boggles, Stompy, or Elves. We also have Dust to Dust. Dust to Dust says exile 2 artifacts. This is awesome against Affinity, and you can also bring it in against Boros Monarch. We have 1 Patrician Scorn that says if you cast another white spell this turn, you can cast Patrician Scorn without paying its mana cost, destroy all enchantments. This is pretty sweet against Boggles. We have 2 Duress that say target opponent reveals his or her hand, you choose a non-creature, non-land card from it, that player discards that card. We have to try to pick counter spells out of our opponent's hands so they can't counter our cards when they're on the way back down using our escape routes. We have 2 Liliana Spectres that say when Liliana Spectre enters the battlefield, each opponent discards a card. This is really great against decks that need a critical number of cards in their hand like Izzet Blitz or Tireless Tribe. We also have Faceless Butcher, which is just an infinite removal spell with escape routes or 1 removal spell a turn. It says when Faceless Butcher enters the battlefield, exile target creature other than Faceless Butcher. When Faceless Butcher leaves the battlefield, return the exiled card to the battlefield under its owner's control. This was originally in the main deck, but I found that it was a little bit too slow to always go off against other decks. If they were going too wide, Faceless Butcher could just be dead. That's why it's in the sideboard. If our opponent has 1 or 2 critical cards we need off the battlefield, we can bring this in as targeted removal. We also have 3 Relic of Progenitus. Relic of Progenitus says tap, target player exiles a card from his or her graveyard, and it also has 1 exile Relic of Progenitus, exile all cards from all graveyards, draw a card. We have something that can nuke both graveyards because we're not always really concerned with our graveyard. We just have the 2 Custody Squires, and having the versatility of having a couple of relics out on the battlefield to control the graveyard makes it just a little bit better than Nihil Spellbomb. So there it is, Esper Routes. We're going to take this deck live into a league at twitch.tv/Anynewprovince this Tuesday night. We're there every Tuesday night playing janky Pauper decks. Before I go, I just want to thank you for watching the video and remind you that you can like the video or subscribe to the channel down below. I'd seriously appreciate it. It's a great way to let me know you're enjoying everything, and it really encourages me to keep making Pauper content. Thank you very much. I really hope you enjoyed Esper routes, and hopefully I'll see you on Tuesday night.